In the previous section I discussed the importance of changing the WordPress defaults, and we looked at that during the installation of WordPress, both through Softaculous or cPanel and also through the WordPress's own famous 5-minute install, where we edited the WP config file. And that's all very well and good for when you're actually installing WordPress, but what if you've already got a site that's up and running and WordPress is already up there, and maybe because you didn't know any better you ended up settling for admin as your default administrator ID and WP underscore for your default for the tables? Well, there's good news. You can change those. One way is to go into phpMyAdmin in cPanel and to edit the database tables. But to be honest, that's a bit scary, and there's a far easier way, and it's to use one of the WordPress plugins. Now, the one I prefer to use is All-in-One WordPress Security, and you can find it if you go into Plugins, Add New, and you do a search for Security. And if we scroll down, here it is here, All-in-One WP Security and Firewall. So I'm going to install this. And activate it. Now if we look down the menu here, we'll see that there's a new entry, WP Security. Now this plugin's got a ton of features, and I'll go through these later on in another lecture, but the purpose of this lecture is really just to show you how to change the WordPress defaults, things such as the default administrator ID, the table prefixes. So that's all I'm going to look at in this lecture. So let's go into user accounts. Now you'll see that this uses a sort of a tabbed interface where you've got a section for the WordPress username, another section for the display name, and the password. Now what I did is my default ID was Udemy Example, but I also created a second admin ID just for demonstration purposes, and I called that admin. So if we go into display name, you see here that it's giving me a warning in red saying your site currently has the following accounts which have an identical login name and display name, and it says click on the link to edit the settings of that particular user account. If you remember from the previous section, I recommended that the user ID and the name you actually display are completely different. The reason for that is that if anybody looks at the name that's displayed and it's the same as the user ID, then basically you've done half the job for them. They've got the user ID and all they need to do now is just guess the password. So it makes sense to have the two completely different. I'm not going to change this just now. Let's have a look at the password section here. Now to be honest, the password utility in this I don't think is that great. It's fine if you want to create a new password and find out how strong it is and how long it would take a desktop PC to crack it, but unfortunately it doesn't actually tell us how strong our existing password is. But you know, that's the thing with these security plugins. There isn't a single plugin that does everything. Some are good at some things, some are not so good at others, and to be honest, this is one of the best. This is one of the only sort of weaknesses I think it actually has. So let's go back to the username tab. So it's telling us here your site currently has an account which uses the default admin username. It's highly recommended that you change this name to something else. Use the following field to change the admin username. So we can call it anything we want. So I'll just make up some random thing here. And change it. And that's it. You can see that the default admin ID has now gone. And if we now look at the display name section, that's also changed because it says your site does not have a user account where the display name is identical to the username. So going back to here, if I was, for example, to log in as COC764 and write a post, then providing I've put my nickname on there, then it would show the nickname rather than COC764, and that nickname would be different from the user ID. So we can go to the users section and have a look at that. So previously we had a username of admin and a nickname of admin, and we've now changed the username to be COC764, but the name that's going to get displayed on the posts, you see here it says display name publicly as, is going to be admin. So if we've got a, I mean it's not a great thing to display, I don't think, but in our case it's actually quite a good thing, because we're going to get all these guys coming along trying to break into our site, and they're going to take a look at the post and they're going to say, oh right, okay, so there's a default ID of admin, because that's what they're going to see. They're going to see posts written by somebody called admin. So they're going to spend all the time trying to break in to our site using the login of admin, and of course it doesn't exist. There is no login of admin anymore. We've changed it to COC764. So they'll be spending all their time trying to break in, and it'll just be for absolutely nothing. They'll be wasting their time. So what about changing the database table prefix from WP underscore? Well, if we go to database security, it tells us here that our current database table prefix is WP underscore, and it makes it quite clear that to increase our site security we should consider changing this. It also advises us that we should do a database backup before using this feature, and I highly recommend you do this. Now, I'm not going to do it because this site contains absolutely no posts at all. It's just an empty site that I'm using for testing purposes. But if you're going to use this, definitely do a database backup. So to change from WP underscore, all we need to do is just tick this box, and by doing that it will generate a random 6-character string for us. We could put in our own string, but you know, I don't see the point of that, so let's just click this. And you see here, gone through 18 tables and it's just stuck on that 6-character random string there. It's done a backup of that, successfully updated that, and everything's gone smoothly, and that's it.